All right. 1 Timothy chapter 3. This is a true saying. If a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. A bishop then must be, here's the qualifications for, actually the qualifications for a pastor and for an elder and a bishop are just about identical. So keep that in mind. A bishop must then be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker, not a violent person, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Verse 6, not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he may fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them that are without, lest he fall into the reproach and snare of the devil. As I said, so those are the qualifications for a pastor, for an elder, for a bishop. They're almost identical, and they all have the same thing in mind. First of all, Paul writes that it's good, someone who feels the calling on their life to be active in leadership in a local church. He said it's a good thing, verse 1. But then the qualifications that none of us ever really meet 100%. We fall short on these next three verses. I don't know of any preacher that is perfect, first of all, but these are guidelines of what God requires for someone to lead a New Testament church, be a leader in a New Testament church, take on a leadership role. Blameless, the husband of one wife. We know the Bible teaches that in the beginning, God made Adam and Eve, and that God's plan is one man, one woman for our life. If someone has multiple spouses, if a man has multiple spouses, it's okay. That doesn't disqualify a person from ministry, especially if they've passed away. But as a for instance, someone whose name I won't mention told us that they had 7 spouses, 7 different spouses, and I was surprised by that. So I don't know what the number is where God begins to, or we begin to question, is that person really called to that position in the church? If a preacher's had 7 wives, let's say, certainly not all at the same time. We know the word teaches, because some have interpreted like that, be the husband of one wife, and some have interpreted, well, that just means one at a time. No, God's plan is, to go through life. Doesn't always work out that way, but again, it's a guideline. Vigilant. What does vigilant mean? Well, when you're looking out for something, you're vigilant. Like if you're waiting on something in the mail, you're waiting for a visitor to come, you're vigilantly looking around. If you feel threatened, we're also vigilant. So that's part of the call. Of good behavior, given to hospitality, and apt to teach. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. I believe some have a gift of teaching that don't necessarily have a gift of administrating of a pastor in the church. Some are very good teachers, but you get them up in front of the entire congregation and they get weak in the knees, and they're good at teaching. It's close. I mean, it's very related, but there is a difference between someone who has the gift of teaching, and you'll discover if you have that gift. You'll know. Okay, verse 3, let's go on. Obviously not a drunkard, not given to wine, not a brawling person, not a striker, and someone who's not greedy of filthy lucre. That's the Bible's New Testament word for money. But in contrast, look at the second part of verse 3, but patient, not a brawler. That's very closely related to no striker, and not covetous. I want someone that wants everything everyone else or someone else has. All the way back in Deuteronomy, God says we're not to covet our neighbor's things, our neighbor's wives, our neighbor's possessions. It's not to covet anything of our neighbors. And that kind of goes against the grain in modern America, where it used to be keeping up with the Joneses was in fashion. That if your neighbor got a new car, you had to get a new car. If your girlfriend got a new dress, who lived next to you, need to get a new dress. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, but someone that's called to be a leader in the church isn't covetous. They don't covet whatever other people have. You've probably met folks that when they hear about someone else experiencing good times or good news, they don't react right to it. It's almost as if they're jealous of God's blessing on that person. Thank God. I mean, I've never felt that way. When someone has something good happen in their life, I'm all for it. And that's how we all should be. Nothing special. That's how we all should be. But we've all met people who, I know I can speak for myself, who have been covetous. That when someone else gets a blessing, oh, Lord, why wasn't that me? I'm as good a person as they are. What did they do to deserve that? Steve?
2024, 2025, they call it haters.
What verse is that?
That's the term nowadays, is a hater.
Oh, yeah, that's right. There's a more modern term.
Yeah.
So don't be a hater. Christians shouldn't be haters. The only thing we should hate is the devil and sin and evil. Amen?
Amen.
Patient, not a fighter, not covetous. Verse 4, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. So as much as possible, raise your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Now that doesn't mean they won't depart from it or they won't go astray. There's only so much you can do as parents, and we only have, I think, a brief window. Now, some have said by the time a child is 5 years old, your personality is already formed, your habits are formed, that you're going to carry with you the rest of your life. Now, of course, you're going to add more knowledge, experience, things like that, but that's sobering to think about. What a short, even if you double that, if we have from birth to when a child's 10 years old, let's just say, that's twice what doctors say is the amount of time for personality to form. So we've got that opportunity. Now, the paradoxical part of that, I'm just going to be honest with you, pastors, policemen, judges often have the most rebellious children. And the phenomena, it carries, it doesn't matter what country you're in, there's just something about those three positions where if a child, especially if a child is subjected to too much discipline all the time, well, they're gonna want to get away from that. They're gonna want to escape that. And like I said, those are three possessions that just come to the top of my mind. Judges, pastors, and police chiefs, for instance. Bobby?
Preachers' kids.
Yes, preachers' kids, PKs. They you gotta think about preachers' kids. They go to church every time the doors are open. Mostly go to every function, and they don't do it because they necessarily want to. Now, you hope that they have a good time when they come to church. We go to, lengths to make sure of that. But even having done all that, the child eventually has to make their own decision. Why am I spending time on that? Because I know of people who've beat themselves up. They said, I don't know what I did wrong. I raised them in church. We lived the word in front of them. We taught them the Bible. And all of a sudden, 17 years old, they become a monster. It's nothing that the parents have done. So this guideline that Paul's writing about is just an idea that a leader in the New Testament church's children should have manners. They should be a subjection. They shouldn't be running all over the church. Sometimes it goes the other way. A child of ministry will think that they're special and they can do whatever they want at church or anywhere else, kind of wild. We never had that problem with our kids. And even my mother and father, who didn't raise us as believers, some of the things I see today when our kids are running through the grocery store and tearing things off the shelf, Maybe we were different, but the four of us walked behind our mom at the grocery store like what those ducks, you see ducks follow their mama duck? That's exactly how we were. I didn't even think about jumping on climbing the aisle, grabbing something, putting it in the cart. Anybody else like that? Didn't even think of that, did you, or did you, Bobby?
I have to be really careful with my balance.
Yeah.
That I have to be so careful when I'm around kids, period.
Hmm.
You know, anytime there's a crowd.
Right.
I'm very cautious.
My mom would have knocked me in the next week.
Yes.
Exactly.
I hear you. Or how about verse 6? I wanted to get to that. Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Sometimes if a person is promoted too fast by the church and not by God, that could be a problem. You don't take someone who just got saved and put him in the pulpit. You don't take a person who just got saved and make him a Sunday school teacher. You know, it takes time. There's no substitute for time and training. And what happens, verse 6 is explaining a phenomenon for the last 2,000 years. I went to college with a couple of people. I can remember one gentleman in particular. The only reason I remember him is because we sat alphabetically at Bible college, and his first name began with K. Kirkland was his name. And he got promoted too fast. The entire time we were there, he knew he was going to be a preacher. He wanted to be a preacher. But then when he got out and really did it, I mean, he made some mistakes. Now, thank God, he was called, and he did correct those mistakes. But at first, he was a novice. And not having been there at the church that he was pastoring, the first church he pastored, I don't know, but it sounded a lot like he was promoted too fast. And if that happened, Paul says, you know, not a novice, because he can fall into the condemnation of the devil. What about verse 7? Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without. Again, lest he fall into reproach and snare of the devil. So I'm going to take a stab at what that means. Verse 7. Who are those that are without?
Homeless.
Anyone outside the faith.
Our church is very good about that.
Right. Anyone who's outside the faith, if they see a church leader acting just like them, what's the difference? They tell the same jokes, they listen to the same stories, they everything the same. You can't tell the difference between them and a non-believer. And verse 7 says you should have as much as possible. Now this gets a little tricky. You want to have a good report of those that are outside the faith. However, you're going to get condemnation too. There's a natural, rub there between being saved and being lost. So it's not that they won't give any trouble, but I can't tell you how many times over the last, 30 years, I'll just be blunt, I've had to eat crow just to keep the peace. And I'm not talking so much in church, I'm talking outside the church. Because your neighbors are watching you, the people you work with are watching you, and you just want to live the Christian life. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna have flaws, but they're gonna know if there should be something different about believers, period, but especially those that have leadership positions in the local church. People outside of faith should take note of them and say, wow, they're nice, they're not any of the other things that we just read in verse 2 and 3, but they exhibit good behavior. I think a good Christian in general should be a good neighbor to someone who lives next to you, a good person to sit next to in school, good person on the job, They see what kind of person you are. And if you got a leadership position in the local church, it's especially important. Now look at the next verse, verse 8. Likewise must the deacons be grave, not double-tongued, not given too much wine. I know one pastor said one time, you notice that difference there? He said, deacons could drink a little. Because he went back and he was kidding. Note verse 3 says, not given to wine. And then when we get to verse 8, not given to much wine, in other words, a drunkard. But a lot of same thing, not double-tongued. not greedy of filthy lucre, verse 8, is the same thing as the qualifications for a bishop. Verse 9, holding the mystery of the faith in pure conscience, and let those also first be proved. Then let them use the office of a deacon, being found blameless. Again, there's that time period, that proving ground, that not being promoted, too quickly. Now, again, that's up to God. God will speak to someone's heart. God will show you what your gifts are, and God expects you to use them. But the Christian life usually doesn't go from 0 to 60 in one day. It takes time and experience. Here's another twist. Verse 11, so must their wives be grave, not slanderers, sober, faithful in all things. Let the deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. Sounds like the qualifications are remarkably similar. They that have used the office of a deacon will purchase to themselves a good degree and great boldness in the faith, which is in Christ Jesus. These things write I unto you, hoping to come unto thee shortly. But if I tarry long, that thou mayest know how thou oughtest behave thyself in the house of God. Remember, a lot of these believers were brand new, and Paul was just still laying down some foundations and telling Timothy to pass that on. But if I tarry long, that thou mayest know how to behave thyself in the church of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth, and without controversy is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen of angels, preached unto Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up into glory. That verse 16 is a week's worth of sermons I can make out of just that verse. That's a lot of good stuff in there. Great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen of angels, preached unto Gentiles, and believed on in the world, and then received up into glory. If ever there was a verse that was the gospel in a nutshell, that probably is it. Okay, let's talk about it.